Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. I'm here again with Dr. Lim Usita. Dr. Lim, what up?
What's going on, Dr. Morales? Good to see you, man. I'm excited to do this.
Lim has graciously agreed to go over 50 important leadership topics that he has been writing over the years and has really compartmentalized for us in being the leadership guy. I'm excited. So, this is Leadership Lesson 19, Leaders Swim. So, what inspired you to write this leadership lesson, especially with a swimming analogy?
Yeah, so like you said, these are leadership lessons that I have written down over the years. And so I have like 50 of them that I've written down that I am working on editing and I want to eventually print in book form. And so part of it is just sharing my lessons. And again, these are lessons that I'm learning, not necessarily the ones that I'm teaching. And as I keep doing leadership things and as I keep evaluating, reflecting on my leadership, like these are just the things that I kind of go back to. So these are, you know, the main the main gist of this particular lesson is a Mintzberg quote, which we'll get into. But the idea, and he uses the analogy of swimming. So really, it's his quote. But what stood out to me is that it's an experiential thing. And I know lots of people that quote leadership books, but like never do anything with it. You know what I mean? They got all the principles and they got all these leadership laws and they can quote all of it, but it's a whole nother thing to get out and put yourself out there and lead. So, that's really why it kind of spoke to me.
Yeah, so let's get into exploring that Mintzberg quote. So, you referenced Henry Mintzberg and
Yeah.
his quote about learning leadership by doing. How does
Yeah.
this resonate with your own leadership experiences?
Yes. So the exact Mintzberg quote is leadership, like swimming, cannot be learned by reading about it. It's experiential. Many times it's during my reflection where I can evaluate my leadership. And when I think about this principle, I think about our last podcast that we did about the competencies in leadership. And I was processing through like just my incompetence in leadership. And so this Mintzberg quote really helped me to understand, like, I didn't know what I was doing there. And I wasn't aware that I didn't know what I was doing there. And so it helps me to understand, first of all, that like leadership is something that you do. You can't learn it in a classroom. Well, you can learn the principles in the classroom, but you can learn all of the quotes and you can quote all of that. And I know a lot of people that quote leadership books, but then to actually do it is a little different. So, you know, what I like about it is like you got to jump in. You got to jump into leadership to learn about leadership. You can learn the principles reading a book and being in the classroom, but to actually learn what it feels like, to learn how your body reacts to it, the emotions of, firing someone or telling somebody no, like those are hard things that you can't necessarily capture in the classroom or in a book. And so the reason why I love it is because it tells you to just kind of jump into leadership and do it.
I would never just tell a kid to just jump in the water if they don't know how to swim because they're going to drown, right? So, what's the balance there? Because if you say that leadership is experiential, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just like swimming, the first thing I do when somebody comes to my swimming club, and if it's like a little kid, I'll say,
Yeah.
okay, what can you do? Swim,
Yeah.
swim a lap for me freestyle, swim a lap for me backstroke.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can do both those, that's good enough to get you on the team. So, the same thing in leadership. How do you ask
Dude,
them to swim a couple laps to make sure they don't drown?
hey, I'm smiling because it's just like swimming. What can you do? What have you experienced? Who have you led? How have you failed? Like it's asking all those same, freestyle, backstroke, what can you do? Right? And listening to them and telling you about their experience. And then you plug them into where you think they might lead. Again, as I said the last time, you lead out of who you are. And so if there's an extroverted leader, then you put them in those spaces. If there's an introverted leader, you put them in those spaces. If they're administrative, if they aren't administrative, like you gotta take a little bit of the personality and ask them what they're doing and what things they've done and plug them in. But it's exactly like what you said about swimming. You have a conversation with them, and if they can't do it, then you figure out a plan to get them there.
What is your barrier to entry in leadership? Because you've been a leader at all levels, a lower level manager, upper level manager, a CEO, both profit and nonprofit. And if somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, I want to be a leader on your team," you're not just going to say yes. What's the barrier to entry to you?
One is taking a look at the role, like, you know, typically if they're trying to get on my team, what is that particular role that I have available? And then typically I have things written out for that particular role. And then do they fit? I mean, it's just like interview, it's a job, right? And just figuring out whether they have the skills and the abilities to fit that role. And then there's also a hunch, there's just kind of that feeling that you get, and I've failed sometimes and sometimes it worked out, you know what I mean? But like you jumped in the pool and sometimes you don't go anywhere and you're just treading water, but you just, the point of the quote is just jump in it and try. And so I'm willing to like add people on my team that fit the qualifications, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes you have to have the hard conversations. And it's also happened with me, as a leader, like I've been let go from situations where it just doesn't fit, and that's okay too. That's part of leadership. You just jump in. You don't know if you could do it, but you can try. And I tried and I learned and I grew from it, and it just wasn't a good fit, and that's okay. So I keep going.
So why do you think it's challenging for people to move from reading about leadership to actually leading?
Because leadership is hard. If it was easy,
Yeah, it
everyone
is.
would do it. It's
Absolutely.
hard. And you can't, and again, like, I can't know, I can't know whether I can do it or not until I do it, and then I learn from it. Okay, that didn't work out so well. What can I change? What can I adjust? And that's just I think that's the part of the Mintzberg quote that I really like. Just jump in, like I think about, I'm not a swimmer. I don't swim. So I think about, just paddling out into the ocean to catch a wave, on a surfboard. Like you just gotta go out there, you know?
I remember the first time that I went surfing, I called you and I said, "Look, I've got a longboard. What do I do?"
Yeah,
And you said, "Just
yeah,
get out there and do it." And I was like, "Dude, it's scary out there. Like these
it
waves,
really is.
they were like little 1 foot waves, and they were like kids that were doing it, but like it was scary for me." So is that kind of way to
Yeah,
say just get out there?
yeah, just get out there. And like, here's the deal: when you're leading, part of the hard thing about leadership is like, I think there's an emotional side of this whole leadership thing that like you can't really pick up in a book. When you lead and you administrate, like people sometimes don't like the call that you make, or people don't like you, period, just because of whatever reason. And you just kind of have to deal with it. Or you might mess up, and like I said, maybe you lose your job, but you're going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hard. And there's a ton of reasons why it's hard, the emotional side, the ability side. But like, again, if you don't jump in, like you can't learn any of that stuff by just reading about it. You gotta jump into the pool or paddle out into the ocean.
What I hear you saying is you just gotta get out there and mess it all up. I think about one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite leaders, Nick Saban, Roll Tide, and he once
So,
said, "If you want to make everyone happy, don't be a leader, sell ice
right.
cream." And it's so true. Like you're going to make decisions that people don't always agree with. And I think some leader that when people go against them, it's a character check to see if you can build that thick skin because you are going to make decisions
100%.
and you're going to make some bad decisions. So, I mean, hopefully the more you do it and the more you read about it, because you do have to read
Yeah.
about it, right? I mean, you do want to go to school because school is
Yeah.
important. And both my parents were
Yeah.
educators their whole lives. And so I know the value of school. Both of us have our doctorates or terminal degrees, but
Yeah.
it's not about what we've learned. We've got to go out and do it. So that's what we have to
Right.
do with leadership. Okay.
And in doing, I remember it took me a couple of years to kind of wrestle through, well, people don't like me. I had like that season in my life, like, it's easy to get people to like you, but once you start leading, like you just become, you know, this other crew of people that is just so easy to hate. And you hear about it, and it took me a little bit to wrestle through, like, these people don't like they don't because I'm doing my job, because I'm leading. And like you said, it took me a while to like figure out, man, I got to get over this. And then you move into a bigger organization where there's a bigger bottom line and there's more people that hate you, and it's just a whole nother level of thick skin that you're gonna have to grow. Like it's just hard. And so it's those little things that like you can't pick up in a book that, this quote really just kind of speaks to me.
In the article,
Yeah.
you discuss the myth of the leadership manual. So, can you explain why structured guides don't always apply to leadership?
So in my thinking, the structured guide typically is a theoretical framework or a story about how someone did it in a particular situation with their particular personality. John Maxwell tells the story like, this is his personality, this is how he did it, and this is what happened. And so I think people like will read those books and like, well, I'm gonna do this just like John Maxwell did. And then they just expect it to like line up exactly the way that he laid it out. And he was telling a story, or he was giving a theoretical framework of this is what will happen. And you got to contextualize it. You got to personalize it. I don't have the same personality as a Nick Saban or a John Maxwell. I got to do it out of the way that, God made me. And so I can take a look at those examples and use those principles, but I got to personalize it. Like all these leadership books, like will share their particular story of what they did and how it works, and they'll give you a framework for like, if you do these kinds of things, this is what's going to happen. But you got to contextualize it, you got to personalize it. And it's just much harder in real life because there's other people that you're working with, and they also have feelings, and they also may like you or may not like you. And so actually I was thinking through that, like if they don't like you, sometimes it's easier to lead. What I mean? Because this is what I got to do, and I just got to do this thing. And sometimes when you do like the person, it's harder to lead. But like you can't learn those lessons until you jump in to actually lead.
So, for leaders just starting out, what advice would you give them about balancing theory with real world practices?
Yeah, I think you still have. I'm not saying don't read the book, right? Read the books, take the classes, listen to these podcasts, listen to episode 86, the one that we just did about leadership competencies. Like, learn the stuff, learn the leadership principles, learn the leadership laws, learn all the theories, and then practice them. And practice them where you're at. Like, you can lead wherever you're at. You don't necessarily need to wait till you're the leader of whatever it is that you're working at to do this stuff. You can lead right where you're at. So practice. And then the thing that I think this lesson like teaches us is once you dive into the pool and you're treading water and you're doing the leadership stuff, to spend the time to reflect and evaluate, well, how did that go? What could I have done differently? Like what worked? What didn't work? What was confusing about what I did? And like those reflective practices, I think developing those reflective practices in your leadership development really kind of helps you to grow as a leader. And then you just repeat. You just try it again. Practice, reflect, evaluate, practice the principle again, and then you get better and better. Just like when you coach swimming, right? You guys show up at typically ungodly times in the morning, and they jump in the pool and they practice their kicks and their strokes and when to breathe and when to turn and how many strokes. I don't know these things. I'm not a leadership. I mean, I'm not a swim coach, but you practice all of those things until you get to the point where you're not necessarily thinking about it. I mean, it's the same in leadership. You jump in, you lead, you reflect, you evaluate, do it again.
Yeah. Man, I love that. In fact, you talking about swimming and getting up, nobody like just so you know, nobody likes to get up in the morning and go to morning practice. It's a
No.
love-hate relationship in swimming. And
Yeah.
so I think that really corresponds with leadership a lot because sometimes you don't want to do it, but you got to get up,
Right.
you got to do it.
And
And
you got to
so
practice.
absolutely. So in that vein of swimming, let's talk about leading in the deep end. So you mentioned the deep end concept in leadership where leaders face unexpected challenges. So can you share an example of a time when you had to swim in the deep end?
Man, I have so many stories and examples, but situations will come up where you have like limited information or no information and you have to make a decision, you know? And it's a little easier when you have all the information and there isn't a time pressure, but sometimes you get into the deep end where you have to make a decision. There's not any time. You don't have all the information, and they're looking to you as the leader to make that decision. And again, sometimes you make the right decision, and sometimes you got to learn from the decision. You know, sometimes sometimes your decision impacts somebody's livelihood, you know? Sometimes your decision is, you know, you have to fire somebody. Those are not easy things to do, especially, when you weren't in control of the situation and something happened and you just got to make a decision. Sometimes you just have to make the best decision you can without knowing how it'll go. And then you have to have the wherewithal or the hubris to like stand by your decision. And that's some things that like, I mean, those are hard lessons to learn. And when you win, you give credit where it's due. And when you lose, you take responsibility when it doesn't go well. And you just, again, evaluate, reflect, how can I do this better the next time?
So, how can leaders build the adaptability required to face unpredictable situations?
You're going to behave like you've always behaved. Like you can get better at leadership, but like how you lead one thing is how you lead everything, right? Like knowing yourself well enough to know how you lead in all of those situations just kind of helps you to adapt. You need to reflect on how you could have done that differently or hold fast to what you did and then adapt, right? You can't adapt to a thing if you don't even know what that original thing was that you need to adapt to. Back to our last conversation about competency. You can't know those things until you actually start doing it, and maybe a mentor points it out or maybe a team member helps you point it out so that you can make those changes to adapt. And then like I keep coming back to this. When you have a vision for your leadership, like that vision for your leadership helps you to stand firm in your decisions, right? And and when you keep coming back to that vision, you can know whether to adjust your behavior or maybe get out of that situation that you're in. It might not be a great situation for you. It might not be a great fit for your leadership style, and that's okay. And then you move on and you try to find a better leadership situation. But but this adapting is is what keeps you in the deep end longer. It's what keeps you swimming longer and faster. It just gets better and better the more that you practice it. Yeah, I think
That's
I
great.
think
So,
as leaders, we need to always constantly adapt. I
yeah,
think I don't think you ever get to the point where you're like, I'm there. You know what I mean? Like I'm like the leader. I've gotten to that point where I don't need to change or grow or adapt any longer. Like you can always get better. As a leader, I think you can always get better.
yeah, we've heard so many places that the only constant is change, and I think that
Yeah,
really goes for leadership. I know a lot of leaders who get frustrated with change, and we
yeah,
just we just got something figured out, and now we're dealing with this. I'm like, that's what leadership's about. If you don't
right.
like that, get out of the game. If you want things to be, if you want calm waters, you need to be in something else, because
Yeah,
leadership is, like you said, if it were easy, everybody would do it. The reason we need leaders is because people don't do things or can't do things usually without specific direction. And so if everything, again, so a swim team would be, if it would be successful without a coach, well, then you wouldn't have to have a coach. But if a coach
right,
isn't there, nobody's going to do the work. Who's going to get in at 5 o'clock in the morning without a coach just yelling at them? I mean, how many times do I have to yell at my kids to get in the water at 5 in the morning? And we've been doing this every day for
right.
years. So,
And it's the only
but
way that they're going to get better.
it's the only way they're going to get better. And so I think leaders, inspire, and I think leaders can help people to find a way, because again, success just performance based. It's
Mhm.
learning how to do the mundane things when we don't want to do it. It's getting it up in the morning when we don't want to get up in the morning to swim or to read or to, that's why I tell people all the time. You've got it. All leaders are readers. Not all readers are leaders, but all
Right.
leaders are readers. And people say to me, "But
Absolutely.
Mo, I don't have time. I'm so busy." And I said, "Well, then you're too busy to be a leader." Because if you're not learning anything new, then you got nothing to tell me. You got nothing to tell your people. If you haven't learned something new from some kind of article, book, whatever, in the past 2 weeks, you've got nothing
Yeah.
good to say. I mean,
Right.
you literally just put out another article on Medium, which is an app, and we'll throw that in our
Yeah.
show notes. But you just put that
Yeah.
out, and that is on my to read list. And so I read all your articles because you and I do a lot of stuff together. So that's important to me. So I've got a list of my leaders, whether it's books or articles or anything in between, blog posts, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it gets longer and longer. And it should be. And so for leaders who tell me, again, the bottom line is, Mo, I don't have time to read, then you don't have time to lead. So great stuff. Let's talk about practicality and leadership. You note that leaders must assess situations carefully before diving in. So how can leaders decide when to act boldly versus a more measured approach?
I like how the swim dive coach said diving
Like,
into the practicality of leadership. I love it. Coming back to this idea of knowing yourself, if you know your ability, your swimming ability, then you know whether you can do. You know whether you can act or not. You know whether you could lead or not. And sometimes when you get into the ocean, like I was thinking about this one particular time. I got into the ocean and the waves were just too big for me. It just was. But I wanted to get out there, and so I paddled out there. And once I got past these huge waves, because when it's coming down, like you just can't really know how big it is. And I remember, like, I got past the waves, and I was just getting ready for a wave, and I looked down to see how far down it was. It was like 15 feet, and I was like, "What am I doing out here? I don't need to be out here." And then I wasn't. It was interesting. I wasn't scared until I got out there, and I looked down, and I was like, this is high. This is crazy. I shouldn't be out here. This is beyond my ability. So what I did was I paddled back to the shore and I went home because, I didn't need to be out there.
you knew your leadership lit at that point.
Exactly. So anytime I look at the forecast and it says it's that big, or I'm driving past the beach and I see it and it's that big and I'm like, that's just not for me. One, I just don't have that ability. You're right. It was my leadership. It was my surfing lid. This is just, plus I had the wrong board. You know what I mean? For what I was doing, I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. I think I just wanted to get out there. I don't, but, but again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I learned it when I got out there and I just never did it again. You know what I mean? The practicality, sometimes you just gotta swim out past the waves and assess the situation and, get into this leadership thing and like, okay, I can't do this. Call a mentor, call a peer, call a friend, call your board member, call somebody like, how do I get out of this situation? Help me. Having a community around you just really kind of helps you in your leadership develop. Well, not just in your leadership development, it helps you in your leadership. And it gets better and better the more times you get out. But that situational awareness grows with every experience. Every time you paddle out, you just get better. You just get stronger. And the next time will be better. I mean, back to this thing that we were talking about earlier, it's just hard. Leadership is just hard. But you can't learn it unless you jump in. But yeah.
So we've talked a lot about jumping in. So let's talk about leadership by example. Your emphasis on leading by example is really powerful in this article. So how does modeling behavior impact a team's willingness to take risks?
Man, what a great question. I think, well, whatever behavior you model, your team and the people following you will just kind of look at. And again, they may like it, they may not like it, they may pick on you, they may praise you. Like, you got to be ready for all of that. When it comes to modeling these behaviors and modeling leadership and leading by example, I try to hold true to my beliefs and my vision for what my leadership should look like. And I stay true to my principles, and I'll even take a hit for some of my decisions. I've experienced that, but I stay true to my principles. I stay true to my vision for, who God made me to be and how to lead. Like I said, whatever I do, like even when I'm not trying to model a behavior, like people are still watching. and they take a look at that, and they'll either love you or hate you, but like they're watching you, and yeah, I think I want to highlight this idea that like you can model a behavior, but even when you're not modeling the behavior, you're still modeling the behavior. When you're not
Yeah.
conscious of it, they're still watching what you're doing.
Yeah, I've noticed that I've taken on traits of the men and women who I followed over the years, and
Yeah,
then it becomes very humbling when the people that you start to lead and influence, they start modeling your behavior or use the words or terminology that you do. Both you and I have spent a lot of time in youth ministry. I've also been, like I said, a swimming and diving coach for the entirety of my life. And the more I spend time, because when you're a coach, you're with these kids in the morning, you're there in the afternoon, you're there on weekends, and there's just there just comes a point where you can't fake it, even if you wanted to. That's why I don't like fake it till you make it. You have to become the person that you want others to emulate, because when you're tired and it's been a long day, a long week, a long month, a long season, it's going to come out. And that's when people say, well, this coach, this leader, they don't really
yeah,
believe what they're saying. It's just a
right,
bunch of hogwash. And I don't want to be that kind of leader. So,
right.
that having been said, what advice would you give to leaders who want to inspire positive action in
Yeah.
others through their own example?
When I think about that, I just go first. You know, if you want to lead, you just got to go first, and then those that you are leading will follow you. Lead from up front, and don't ask anyone to do what you wouldn't do first. I mean, it's just kind of a neat principle. It's just a great principle to have, like in your leadership vision. And I've tried to live that out. I found myself like asking people to do things that I wouldn't do, and again, just in the reflective practices, realizing, no, I have to do that first, and I have to be willing to do that if I'm going to expect that of other people. If you want to inspire your team or people following you, like go first, lead.
So, this is an interesting principle in coaching because I was a swimmer
Yeah,
and I got in the 5 a.m. cold water when the when the pump was broken and it
yeah,
was 60 degrees in the water instead of the
yeah,
78 it's supposed to be. Coach said, "Get in, we'll fix it." And I got in. And I remember those days. I remember working hard in the gym. I remember running hard. I remember swimming hard. I remember doing everything as the best I could. Now that I'm a coach, I can't keep up with my swimmers. They could run circles around me. And
right.
so sometimes when kids would say, "Well, coach, why don't you jump in the water and you do this?" There's a time for me as a coach where I have to say, "Look, I put in the time.
Yeah,
I was in your shoes. I did do that for 17 years of my life. I'm not going to be able to run 4 miles a day with them and swim 8,000 yards and then put in, all that time. I just can't do that. But I
yeah,
can work hard as a leader and I can work hard in the things that I do." And so one thing that I always tell my student athletes is, look, I'm willing to work as hard as you are, if not harder. Now, obviously, I'm not
yeah,
talking about in the pool.
yeah,
So, does that correlate to leadership at all? Because you said go first. Don't do anything
yeah,
or don't
yeah.
make your people do anything that you wouldn't do. How does that work for this analogy, or does it?
Sure. I think it works. Now, I coach women's volleyball on the collegiate level. And when I was younger, I could keep up with them. But I remember as a coach, because I had been playing for, at that point, over 20 years, like there was wisdom, and there was like little technical things and little tweaks that they could do with the spike or the way that they positioned themselves that they weren't seeing, that as a coach I was able to point out. And so even if you can't do it, you have 2 decades worth of experience. I had 20 years experience at that point. And so I had the technical ability to help them get better as players. And I think in leadership, like I have tons of leadership lessons and leadership failures and leadership successes that I can help a younger leader work through. They may be leading in a much bigger situation than I've ever led, but I can still help because I've been doing it longer. You know what I mean? So, yeah, you don't necessarily need to jump in the water with them, but your years of experience, the technical stuff, the little details that they're not seeing, like that's what a coach does. That's what a mentor does because they're, ahead of the journey, ahead of them in their journey. They're a couple of steps ahead. They can help we can help younger leaders process through. This is what you're going to feel. This is what you're going to experience. This is how they're going to treat you. Like all of those things, like we've experienced, and they may not have necessarily experienced, but we can help them even if we're not doing it. Does that make sense? Like we have ability, but we also have experience, which younger leaders may not have.
So what I think about when you say that is a relationship with one of my mentors, and one of your mentors and friends as well, Kevin. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if either of us lead a bigger organization, whether it's not a church or if it's a for-profit. He's been doing leadership longer and continues to learn, so he's continually getting better. So it doesn't
Yeah,
matter if I have a bigger company or bigger church. There's things
yeah,
that he's going to be able to teach me because he's been doing it longer, and he chooses to
right,
continue to learn. Is that what
right.
you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Like they have more experience. They also have an outside perspective. They can see
Yeah.
me and they can see, like Kevin can see me, and he's known me for many years, right? So he knows me in many different situations, and he can point out and he can, yeah, he just brings that outside perspective and that mentor perspective to me that I cannot see, that I am unconsciously, unconsciously aware. Like I just don't know what I don't know. And bringing in a leader or a coach helps us to see what we don't know. And so, yeah, absolutely, 100%. It's helpful to have, you know, mentors and coaches help us do that.
Yeah, this is all good stuff. So, final thoughts. If there was one takeaway you wanted listeners to have from
Yeah,
this leaders swim analogy, what would it be?
yeah. Dive in, jump in, paddle out, just just lead first. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Like that's why I
Just
love
do it.
this analogy. Like you can't jump. I mean, I guess you can jump into the deep end of the pool and not do anything, but it'll only last a minute. You know what I mean? You're either gonna pass out, die, or somebody has to come save you. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to swim if you jump into the deep end. But just dive, just jump in, try it, do it.
So, how can leaders embrace the journey of learning by doing, especially those who are hesitant to jump in then?
Yeah. Like we mentioned in the Kevin Cobb scenario, Kevin, shout out to Kevin. I hope you listen to this, man. We love you. But find somebody like Kevin, find a mentor or find a partner, find a friend to go with you. Go with somebody. Do it with someone. Do it with a coach. And you know that saying, if you wanna go fast, go alone. But if you wanna go far, go with a bunch of people. Like go with a bunch of people. And like you can go fast for a little bit by yourself. But like when you take, I like here's another analogy. I like the analogy of the fellowship. Like I think about a fellowship, right? Like the Fellowship of the Rings, right? Everybody needs a wizard, a mentor. Everybody needs a king. Everybody needs a dwarf and an elf, and everybody needs, a Sam, to go with them. I'll go with you wherever you want to go, man. Like, let's go, let's do it. Like have that fellowship. I love the idea of like a mentor, a peer, a teacher, a king, somebody that I look up to. Like, yeah, those are the people that I go with. And so through the successes, through all the failures, like they stick with me, and they help me process through all of it and how do I get better, and keep going. Yep. Yeah. Back to this leadership principle for my vision for myself. You lead out of who you are. And so first, write down your vision for your leadership. It's always going to be write down, this is who I am, and this is how I lead, and this is how I want to lead. But if you want to dive in, like start with who you are as a leader, who you are as a person, and write those things down. That way you can come back to it to evaluate. And then second, find a mentor, or I like to say, or be so amazing that mentors see you and they want to mentor you So either way, find a mentor or be amazing that somebody wants to mentor you. And then third, lead right where you're at. Don't wait till you're in a leadership position. Don't wait 6 months or 6 days. Just lead right where you're at. Lead in your relationships with your friends. Lead with your family. Lead with your team. Even if you don't have the position of leadership, you can still lead. So lead right where you're at and don't wait to be chosen. For me, it's write that book, right? Get it printed, even if no one buys it. Like that's part of sharing these leadership lessons. I don't want to write a book. I've never written a book. Truly, I don't want to write in the leadership niche. I just don't, because there's so many leadership books out there. But I find myself like editing this book on leadership, and you know what? Yeah, maybe nobody reads it, but that's not the point. Like the point is that I learned how to lead and that I jump into the pool and I write this book even if I don't want to, right? So, yeah, man, write down your vision for your leadership, find a mentor, and then, lead right where you're at. That's it. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for having me.